Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Hello and welcome to the New Commons. This is John Michael Dumais.
And this is Johanna, Laurie.
And we're very happy to be bringing you this new program here on Fact TV here in Keene. And as you can see, the New Commons is creative conversations for a flourishing world. And we'd like to talk just a little bit about what we mean by each one of these terms. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with commons. When I think of commons, I think of the commons right over there on the square in Keene, kind of as a place for gathering, a place for celebration, a place for discussion. Of course, it also reminds me of this idea of a place where people would bring their animals in the past to graze sort of on a space that was collectively owned. And so I think when we're talking about the commons, we're talking about that kind of idea of what do we share in common and how can we maximize or optimize the functioning of the commons. We'll have a lot more to say about it, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. What do you think about the commons?
Yeah, and I think the fact that we're calling it the New Commons means that we really have a different kind of take on it, as you were saying, that this isn't really just a physical space anymore, but this is a relational space. This is a space among people in which we need to find new ways of relating to each other that maybe we haven't done in the past. It gives us new opportunities, really, to try, within a safe space, really, to try on some new ways of being together, new ideas, different kinds of sharing. So I think that is basically what's new about it for me.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And moving on to the idea of creative conversations for a flourishing world, for the creative conversations part is really, I think we've talked about this as almost like a new operating system or a set of agreements and understandings where we can come to respect each other's perspectives, where we can have a space where alternative viewpoints are okay. You know, it's like we're not here to win arguments, for example, but we're here to explore together. And this is not what's common in today's world, right? Because today's world is so much about the quick soundbite, the meme, oh, this person destroyed that person with this thought. It's like, no, that isn't where we're going. We're going to a place where collectively, because we need to solve problems in our world, collectively we need to be able to have a space to have those conversations for resolving issues, but also for generating new ideas together, and for a space where we can iterate that whole process and come to a better understanding together.
Yes, exactly. And when we talk about, so what exactly is a flourishing world? Well, I think what we're seeing right now is a world that isn't flourishing very well. When we look around us, there are just a lot of things happening we wish would be different. And so for me, this involves new visioning, new ideas. It really involves feeling that there is a possibility to get out of the current difficulties that we are, or the war with Russia, whether it's the COVID or whatever is coming next, whether it's whatever it is that's bothering us, that is still hanging on and in some way making our life difficult. This really what we need to be able to do is to imagine a world, really. First we have to start imagining, how would we really like things to be? What else could we do besides that, you know?
I like that. Yeah, it's a space for imagination, a space for thinking up something new. And, you know, for me, it circles right back around the idea of a flourishing world, circles back around to the idea of the commons, which is an expanded definition of what it takes for humans to flourish in the natural world, which is, you know, we're familiar with things like, you know, we all have electricity, we have running water, you know, we have education, we have public services, and we need to think, I think, a little bit more these days about, as this world continues to molt, as we go through a reset of some kind, whether it, we hope it's going to be reset by humans at the local level. But as we go through these changes that we're going through, and we are going through very profound changes right now, that we can start to have these constructive conversations about what does it take actually to have a flourishing world on every level. That would be, socially, physically, spiritually, mentally, all of the above. And we'll get into some of those details. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and how I came to be here, and then Johanna will do the same. Again, my name is John Michael Dumais. I was born in Southbridge, Massachusetts, raised in Keene from the time I was 1 year old, so I'm a Keene person. Went up through St. Joseph's School, Keene Middle School, Keene High School, and then went on to Harvard to study psychology and social relations. I've spent a lot of time in the nonprofit world, in education world. I worked to end the death penalty in New Hampshire. We were the last New England state to do that. We ended that in 2019. Other states are still working on that, by the way. Back in 2005, I started a nonprofit here in Keene called Monadnock Institute for Community Advancement and Sustainability, or MICAS for short. And really, that was similar to the kind of purpose of this show. We were attempting to create a community space for conversations about how do we create a sustainable world. We were looking at peak oil. We were looking at education. We were looking at the polarization that was even obvious then. We did a lot of work around local farmers and local food production. And that actually organization continues on as Monadnock Sustainability Hub. And then I did more nonprofit work, and more recently, in the COVID era, started an organization called Collaborative Communities Coalition, of which Johanna is a board member, and that has exactly the same kind of purpose that we're talking about here today. It's how do we relocalize, how do we bring a new ethic to community conversations? What's needed for a thriving world is it's the same conversation, really. So I'm happy to be here, and appreciate Josh and Garrett setting us up today, and Fact TV for offering this in Keene again after Cheshire TV went away a year or two ago, and it's an important community resource to have, and we certainly appreciate having it. So.
Well, I think I'll start off where you left off about Cheshire TV, because many of you may remember me from Cheshire TV, which I ran a program with Jim Smart, retired professor emeritus in history at Keene State College, for 3 years previous to that. Actually, this show didn't start with us. It started with Tom Rogers, local peace activist, who approached those of us who were in the 9/11 Truth Alliance and said, I really want to do a show on 9/11 because I feel that people do not really know the true story about 9/11, and will you come and join us? So initially that was that group that joined him. Then a lot of people fell away, and it was just Jim and me and Tom. Tom died in 2017, so the show was then left to Jim and me. At that point, instead of calling it Tip of the Iceberg, 9/11 Tip of the Iceberg, we then called it just Tip of the Iceberg, and we took on all kinds of other things happening in the world today, and anything we wanted to talk about, basically. And so this, and as I say, many of you, I think, have seen that show. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. But this is different the way I conceive this, because we're really focusing on the local community and more of the activism that John Michael's talking about. And so in terms of my own background, mine is quite different from John Michael's. I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1941, just shortly after Pearl Harbor. And so I think of my own life as kind of in themes now. I've been around for over 80 years, and a lot has happened. I think about, certainly in terms of war and peace. That's one of the major themes in my life, because being born into a war, and then that being followed by the Cold War, and by worrying about whether we're going to have a nuclear war. I mean, I can remember hiding under my desk in school and watching videos about all kinds of things that a nuclear winter might bring to us. And this was as a young child, scared all of us terribly. And then, of course, came Korea, where we were fighting. Then came Vietnam. Then came the war in the former Yugoslavia. Then came, and then came 9/11. It's just been one war after another. Since then, we've had a war on drugs, we've had a war on bugs, and now it seems we have a war on each other. So it's really important to me that we sort out how we could have a more peaceful world. Because it seems to me that my entire life of over 80 years has been involved one way or another with war. So that's one theme. Another theme, I think, really in my life has been trying to understand how people can compassionately live with one another. This is something that my parents were interested in. My parents were activists in a certain sense, not perhaps as much as John Michael, but they part of also what they did was they lived in several different. I mean, we moved around a lot. My father was a biochemist, and we went from Illinois to Ohio to New York State, finally settled there. But that was not the end of our adventures, or certainly my adventures. I was at Antioch College during the civil rights era, when lots was going on, when Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. When Kennedy was elected. I think in a way the defining moment for me as a young person was the 3 years that Kennedy was president, that short period in which we all felt, well, maybe after all this period of war and Cold War, there's a chance for something different. And I feel that whatever optimism really that I developed came at that point. It was, as we all sadly know, came to an abrupt end in '63, and then, of course, Martin Luther King was killed as well. But in a way, that hope, however buried it's been at times, is always with me, that we can make something better happen. And part of my feeling about that is a sort of a third theme in my life, and that's really been travel, because I first went to a foreign country when I was 10 years old. I went to Denmark, and with my father and family, he had a sabbatical there at the University of Copenhagen, and that was my introduction to a totally different world from America. And since then, I've lived in about 7 different countries, and learned several languages. So I have the feeling that I've always had the feeling that the world isn't really such a big place, and people really have a potential for understanding each other. And so that is a very important thing to me. I kind of feel that if every single American had a chance to live abroad, as I've had, we'd have a different America, too. We wouldn't have an isolationist America. We wouldn't have an exceptionalist America, because we're really neither of those things. It's just that we need more contact. We need more with people different from ourselves. So.
And speaking of President Kennedy, I mean, he was one of the ones who really pushed for the Peace Corps and for people visiting other countries and being of service. Yes. And I agree with you. The world is very large, but we tend to hang out in our very parochial silos, and it doesn't help us to be there. And I think part of the issues that we've seen is social media generation, or the technology itself has been discussed in the movie The Social Dilemma. For those who've seen it, highly recommend it. Is creating a lot of problems in terms of how algorithms are designed to foment outrage. In other words, clicks. Outrage gets the most clicks. Moral outrage, and so it's not it's not the kind of clear spoken, developed through thoughtful conversation that we're attempting to have here on this show, but it's and so there's something that's missing in society. And I've been on your show once or twice. Yes,
indeed.
And
John Michael came on our show,
and with Jim once, I think, alone. And before that, I was part of a panel, I think, talking about 9/11. So yeah, it's there's a legacy here, and I'm honored to continue your legacy with you, and to be having these conversations with you. And we'll talk more about what we want these conversations to look like. Won't just be me and Johanna, but yeah. So Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about some of the themes that we'll be exploring in the show. And one is relocalization. It's an important theme these days because we've seen over the last few years, especially, these breakdowns in the supply chain. You all heard of boats hanging out in the middle of harbors, in California or other places they couldn't get in to the harbor to unload. Of course, the cost of natural gas and diesel and other things being extremely expensive. And just the idea that, when we have a salad on our plate, that the lettuce might have come from 1,500 miles away, the avocados maybe from Mexico. It's like, does it make sense for our society to be globalized in this way, spend all this money to bring goods from far away, and then suffer what we've begun to see at different places around the world, food shortages, and really the lack of also healthy food because of industrial food practices with things like glyphosate and pesticides and other kinds of things that they're putting in the food. So relocalization is an effort to think about how do we start taking more responsibility locally and regionally to produce the kinds of things that we need. I tend to think of food as one of the primary things, but you can also talk about energy, which is not necessarily a simple topic because we have an energy infrastructure, and energy comes from far away often, and when that gets scarce and we see these massive price hikes in gasoline or heating oil, that puts a strong crimp in everybody's style, especially in an era where we have a lot of inflation. So how do we as a community come together to address the issues of the day and make sure our community has the food, has the energy that it needs, and has the capacity to have these kinds of conversations? Because we're used to having those people over there, the politicians, whoever, do the work for us, and it's work more or less. We can argue about certain things, but it's work more or less. But we're coming into a different time where I think the institutions and the structures of neoliberal capitalism, for example, and this globalist economy are breaking down. The dollar's no longer the reserve currency, and so we need to think about how we support and protect, really, and the people of our region with these kinds of activities and conversations around relocalizing our production.
Yeah, and there's, as you say, there's so many aspects to that, and certainly there's also money, and we see that this is something which we are all going to be dealing with. We don't know how far into the future, but we have a system in which the world financial system seems to be breaking down. It seems to be that we are going to have to perhaps create a local currency of our own, or at least have some kind of means of exchange in case that there are things that we can't deal with because the government has decided something which isn't going to work, or is going to take a long time to set up. So I think we have to think about barter. We have to think about ways that we can perhaps having local currency. Perhaps, certainly, for myself, I've been very happy having a local bank. And I think local banks could step up at this point and try to assure people that if things falter on the national, international level, we still have some support here. We still can lead our lives as we're happy or have been happy doing. So I think that money is an important thing we have to discuss. Also education. It's clear that education really is in turmoil right now, and it has completely to do with the fact that everything is so divisive. It seems to me that there's not truly a safe space right now for children to learn. I'm very concerned about this. I'm connected with the local Waldorf school, which has now become a public school, and I see the growing pains that they're going through, but also the struggles which don't affect just them, but all the other schools. And particularly since the COVID era, in which kids couldn't go to school for a while, and then they had to come masked, and then there was a question of whether they had to take the shots, so they didn't have to take the shots, and so much misunderstanding, fear around that, which has really left a very indelible mark. It's really made it very difficult for both students and teachers and parents, and the wider community to make sure that the children who are the future, this is our future after all, are being supported, and that they're able to learn and to thrive in school, and that they're not just being totally sucked into what's going on in terms of what the adults are talking about and arguing about, which is what I think is happening still right now, is that kids are frightened, they're mad, they're angry, and they have their own ways of acting out when, which is not helpful to them or anybody else, when things are not right in the adult world. So the way that I see that the conversation for education needs to go is we need to think in terms of not just the kids, but how are we envisioning this future of education, really? What does it mean to be an educated person? Are we preparing children to be cogs in some kind of a great, much bigger machine? Are they just going to be spewed out and made to go here, there, or the other place? They don't want to do that, and we don't really want them to do that either. So we need to figure out what it is that the future is going to bring for them, and how we can best support them and best make them feel that there's a hopeful world for them to step into.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it fits in with a relocalization conversation in the sense that children ought to be part of as they learn in their school, they ought to be part of the functioning of the community in terms of how food grows, what we do with our water, how children are raised, how you deal with money, all these things, and how you think critically. These are not greatly aspects of our current, educational system. And folks might be familiar with the work of John Taylor Gatto, who's now deceased, but he was a New York Teacher of the Year who wrote The Dumbing Down of America, about the kind of how the system isn't really designed to produce, thinking individuals and critical thinking individuals, and students who are able to respond from their own moral center and have a sense of who they are in the world, and be empowered to express their own unique gifts. So a lot of times it's about, getting the A on that test. It's about answers that have been, produced for them in advance, that may bear very little resemblance to what they have to deal with in everyday life. So education, to me, is a huge, huge thing, and I think that's one of the areas that's going to be really ripe for transformation in the coming time.
I think that's true, but I think it's important to realize what kind of resources we have here, because I have not lived recently in this community for very long. My husband and I lived here for a period of about 10 years, then left for about 20, and then came back. And both when we were first here and when we came back, we've realized what a very solid community this is. We have a lot of intelligent, well-meaning people in this community who are trying very hard to make a difference. So I think we have a lot to work with here. So while I agree that in general education is not going in the right directions, I think we're trying very hard here, and we have a great deal of potential here for doing some of the things that we need to do to help bolster it in this tough time. So
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about health as one of our major topics and categories. And essentially, when I think about health, I think about not just the absence of disease, but I think of optimal functioning of our mind, cognition, relational health or community health, which is, I think we can look at different cities around the world. Here in the U.S., that's suffered significantly. We can also look at environmental health and kind of the great poisoning that's gone on. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in quite a bit of detail. And really encouraging people to start taking care of their own health and to be responsible rather than expect the pill or the doctor or whatever surgery they can get to do it for them. And of course, we've had a lot of discussion and disagreement around things like vaccines and things like masking and other pandemic measures. We understand that these are highly contentious and polarizing, but we feel that it's necessary that for us to be having a safe space to talk about them, to expand the range of information that people have access to around health and healthcare.
And when we talk about health, we're also talking about mental health, which is a big issue for New Hampshire and the rest of the country and the world. And there are many aspects of that as well. But one of the aspects of that that ties in with what we're talking about, and I'm sure we will also talk about a whole lot more, is the place of the role of the media in the information landscape, as far as how does that affect not only our knowledge but our mental health. And my sense is, and a lot of other people are also saying the same things, is that we are constantly bombarded by the media with things we supposedly should think about. We guess, I think often rightly, that these are coming from corporations who are trying to get us to buy things, or it's coming from the government who wants us to feel a certain way, or it's coming from large interest groups, perhaps think tanks. And, the media seems to be a conduit for control in a way that they didn't used to be, but now that it's possible, they're doing that. And I think, when I talk to my friends as to what they're watching on television, it's the ratings of these various CNN and Fox go up and down depending on who is saying something that people can relate to. This is what I see, is that when just having all these talking heads throwing all kinds of what is some kind of information at you and then lots of opinions doesn't do it for most people. Most people really want to have a better idea. So how do I sort out what's true, what is fake news, and which is fake and which isn't? And all of these questions that we don't have much discussion about in the media. We have a lot of opinions, and the people and finger pointing and saying, well, now that's fake news and that isn't, and this is reality and that isn't, and this that doesn't help us, because we need to be able to think for ourselves and sort it out for ourselves. And if we were just presented what, in a sense, what I think of is the news I grew up with, which I think there was an attempt there at least to just present what was happening every day as far as you could determine, instead of putting a spin on it, that people actually had a chance to think this over, mull this over themselves. So I think that the media, the whole media landscape has to be looked at in terms of also the technology that controls it, and the people, the individuals who control it. And then I think also, because there's just a lot of propaganda out there, there's a lot of censorship out there. People who would like to say something different often can't. They're the large search engines cut you off. I think you've had this experience recently, as have many people who have tried to post things online. And of course, in terms of talk shows, you just don't get invited if you have something they don't want to interview or they don't want to talk about. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. People know that Tucker Carlson on Fox. They're not saying anything about what he says, but he's recently has come out with I would say counter mainstream narrative perspectives, and now he's gone, and he's not the first to go. We had Matt Taibbi, for example, and Michael Schellenberger appear before Congress talking about the Twitter files, and the Twitter files were really an expose of how government agencies, not just one, but a whole slew of government agencies, would call up Twitter or have access directly to Twitter's back end through a portal, and say, we want to get rid of that person's account, get rid of that person, without any due process at all. And that's, government getting involved in censorship with large tech organizations is highly problematic. And the fact that Taibbi and Schellenberger, who were both progressives, come from the left, were completely shut down on mainstream news and were straw-manned, character assassinated kind of thing. And even I think the IRS visited Matt Taibbi's house while he was in Congress that very day, at that very moment.
Yeah.
And so there's an issue with the trustworthiness of the media, and I think a recent Rasmussen poll said more than half the country believes that they're not really getting an accurate story from the media.
I've seen those polls too. Yeah.
So we're hoping that these conversations, because they're going to be longer form, can help to address some of that. So I'd like to move on to technology, because I think we kind of referred to it there in our last little segment. With Twitter, and we've got all kinds of big tech censorship and surveillance going on. We know about Cambridge Analytica in the 2016 election, and how there were some thousands of data points on every person as to how they responded to posts on Facebook, and how they were likely to vote, and how, just the amount of information that's being collected right now by big tech on every single person. And it's not so much that it's being collected. I mean, that is a big problem, and Snowden talked about that, whistleblower on that, but it's what they're doing with it and how they're using algorithms to decide, oh, this person is good and this person is bad. And we've even seen with the whole Russiagate fiasco, essentially that was a false flag designed in 2016. Now that information is coming out, not, again, greatly covered in the mainstream media, but Anthony Blinken has been directly implicated in reaching out to 51 CIA, former and current CIA at the time in 2016, to say, oh yeah, that Russiagate is a real thing, and the laptop of Biden's son's laptop is not a real thing. That's all just a Russian hoax. And we know now that that's not actually accurate, but it's just another example of how technology can be used against the people. And of course, we have now the emergence of very highly capable, I'll use capable in air quotes, artificial intelligence,
yes,
which is, and a lot of people are now yelling about that as being dangerous. We have 4G and 5G cell towers, and which have been claimed to not have any negative health effects. Yet people are reporting, not everyone, but people are reporting electrosensitivity on that, and there's been a lot of suppression also on that information. And there's geoengineering. There's continued chemical technology that's hurting the planet, whether it's glyphosate or dicamba. Things that have been outlawed, for example, in Europe, are still being used here in the United States, and are they're killing rivers, and it's directly implicated in a lot of the health problems that people are having. So we feel like it's an important thing for us to be able to have a space where we can look at all the evidence around technology and basically be able to take in multiple perspectives, not just an anti-technology perspective, but don't be reductionist about it, but also don't close off your research or speakers that might have a heterodox viewpoint on the use of certain technologies.
And I think we really have to take into account what the effect the technology has on children. And because when I think about it, I grew up with radio, and TV didn't come in until I was 10 years old. So, and of course, computers, I was very much older when that happened. So, and I remember a totally different childhood from what I see my grandchildren having right now. And I'm very concerned that young people just get distanced more and more from themselves, from the natural world, from each other, by technology. You see, kids walking around, talking to each other, even if they're standing next to each other on the telephone. I mean, and then the programs they're watching, there's constantly something that they're inventing in terms of programming to interest young people in an artificial world, in a world really which includes not only people, but people from other planets, robots, mixes between people and robots. It's as if it's setting them up for a future in which they're no longer human beings. And I think this is a much bigger,
You're talking
area
about the transhumanist agenda?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
There's an actual agenda out there right now to think, well, maybe people would be better off if they were part robot.
Connected to the Internet of Bodies, and neural links up to the Internet, so that you can access information without having to click on your phone even. So these are dangerous things. And speaking to what you were mentioning before about mental health, just again this kind of algorithmic thing where people are clicking all the time, it's been shown to be a negative impact on mental health for both boys and girls, but even more so for girls, younger girls, who then get attached to being liked or not liked, and because at that age and stage, 10 to 14 years old, there's so much peer pressure to conform, and if you don't get as many likes as that person over there, and it's been directly implicated in an increase in the use of antidepressants and anti-anxiety
suicide, all
drugs,
kinds of things.
so it's a major thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to move on to the topic of money. You did start to talk about it a little bit more. Do you want to say anything more about it?
Well, go ahead, and I'll jump in.
Well, so I think we're all noticing that right now there's a problem with the banking system, and this is why I think Johanna mentioned that we're thinking about what can we do locally around creating local exchange systems, barter, community currencies, that kind of thing, because the banking system, as we all see, several banks have failed. There's lots of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with quantitative easing and the government's capacity to or the Fed's capacity to just print money out of nothing, which increases the money supply, which is now directly implicated in things like mass inflation, even the consumer price index, quote unquote. If you go by how the consumer price index was calculated in the 1980s, for example, we wouldn't be at a 6 to 8% inflation. We'd be at twice that. So we're not getting accurate information. We know that politics is directly implicated in money, and of course the revolving door in Washington between lobbyists and big corporations and the agencies that should be overseeing them, like the CDC and the FDA and Federal Communications Commission. These organizations are not doing their job. Not when the next person they hired was somebody who was the CEO of the company that they were just supposedly regulating. So money is a huge issue. Obviously, the increase in disparity from those who have and those who have not, especially during the COVID era, many more billionaires created, and also many more people have been thrown into poverty. So it's an issue that we need to talk. It's not just an out there, over there in the country, in the world thing. It's an in here, right now issue. We know locally about the issues around housing and drug use and all kinds of other things. These are problems that are showing up today in our world, in the Monadnock region, in Keene, in the state, and we need to find a way to address those. And we, as citizens, can't just sit back and hope somebody else is going to do that.
That's true. Yeah. And we have to think about the fact that what we pay with our taxes, where is it going? It seems to be going not just to fund the government, but it seems to be going into this endless hole that's created by money which comes out of nothing. We're creating money out of thin air now, and we're trying to back this up and say that just by saying, well, we'll borrow more. And so this conversation about where's the money going to come from, really is a big one, is a huge one. Money is not. Money is only a means of exchange. It's really nothing else. And if you don't have it functioning properly, then nothing is functioning properly. That's the thing.
And I think it's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Another theme that we'll be exploring, I think we've more or less just talked about, which is governance and kind of our institutions, and even worse than the recent polling, even worse than people's respect for media is people's respect for government. They really just don't
It's
feel...
It's very low, isn't it?
It's very low.
Yes.
We have problems, obviously, with the election machines, the black box voting, we like to call it. They've outlawed that in Europe, by the way, but it's still here in the United States. No. When it's been proven time after time, including by people on the left and the right in Congress, they've looked at these machines, and when it's, when they really look at, it's easy to see that they can be hacked. It's easy to see that they can be gamed. And that's just one problem. The election is just one problem, but it's this whole pay-to-play system.
Yeah, and it seems to me that actually what they're doing is that if each, a Republican area is using machines to their advantage, and a Democratic area is using the machines to their advantage. So they talk about getting the machines, but they really don't don't think.
Neither side has done anything. Did you notice?
Yes,
Did you notice?
Noticed,
exactly.
Right.
So
Right,
we are having we are having a crisis really in people's trust in government. Massive corruption on both sides.
Yeah.
This is not about one party or another, and for me also the political gamesmanship that's really happened all along the way. But I think it's the more people can see this winner take all system, that hey, when I win,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what to do,
Yeah.
and then when you win, I don't want you to tell me what to do. It's like there's a lack of understanding, I think, about how governance should work, and we call that kind of a game A system or competition, winner take all or zero sum game. I win, you lose. In other words, and I think. Part of what I would like to explore is a post-partisan kind of politics,
Yeah, no.
where people can come together and work through their differences, and this really, I think, best happens on the local level. Also, I mean,
Definitely, yeah.
all politics is local. That's not my phrase,
Yeah.
but I think that's something that we need to address on the local level, and I think the solutions are going to come from the local level as well.
Let's hope.
And so I think this comes to our final theme or topic area. Not that we won't probably cover a lot of other things, but that's reclaiming our humanity. And
Yes,
this
yes.
is hugely important to both of us. So.
Yes, it is. It is, because what we're really talking about is the uniqueness not only of us as individuals, but of our region, of our country, and that similar uniqueness in other countries, And so what it really means to be human is that we honor and respect each other, whether it's on the local level or on these macro levels, and in so doing, what we do is we open up the possibility for culture to remain. I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is kind of the degradation of culture and the kind of destruction of culture, really, all around the world. And this is not the right direction to be going. Human beings have been around now. We find that they've been around much longer than we thought. And they've been developing this culture, for thousands and thousands of years. And so what we really need to look at is the fact that we have, that the past is really our heritage, and we need to respect that, and we need to help people live within their own heritages, not make them have somebody else's, or not make them feel like theirs is no good. And then in the present here, we all, in the present, really, it's a matter of action. What is the right action that we're doing that's going to make that happen? And for the future, it's always a vision. It's always what is it we can come to, And I think that if we're talking about the future of humanity, that we have those three parts have to work together. We have to not forget any of them, and we have to make sure that, because our past is just as valuable as our future, and in fact we won't have one if we get rid of our past, if we don't honor who it is where we've come from and what it is we believe in. So we have to think about ways really that we can reclaim our humanity. As a way of fulfilling ourselves as individuals, but also as fulfilling sort of the future for our children, for whatever it is we want to see coming. And the big parts of this that we haven't spoken about yet are the arts, because it's really through the arts and through awakening of and this is a major part of self-fulfilling. If you have something that really makes you happy, something that you enjoy doing every day, then life isn't a drudge. It isn't just one misery after another. And a great deal in the course of our humanity as human beings is that we have discovered ways to do this, and we have art, and we have music, and we have dancing, and we have theater, and we have all these wonderful things. I was at a concert last night, which gave me great hope. It was the first major concert of the year. Probably going to be the last, because this is getting toward the end of the school year, that our Gathering Waters community had, in which kids in the upper school had their musical groups perform both the instrumental and the singing, and what was so hopeful to me was seeing that young people really enjoying themselves while doing this, and feeling like as long as children can still take great pleasure in this, we haven't lost our humanity. It's very, very important that adults do it too. We have to enjoy ourselves, for ourselves, and we have to model it for them. But as long as they're willing to do it, And they're not just plugged into a phone listening to somebody else do it, or any of the other things that they might be doing that are not themselves doing it. I think there's a hope. There's really hope.
There's a great need for that, for self-expression through the arts, because the arts, I mean, let's face it, music, poetry, writing, we can express parts of ourselves that we can't normally express through discursive conversation or writing.
Yeah.
You could say different levels of our soul, different levels of our striving, of our values. And I think this is part of reclaiming our humanity, is to be able to bring that level of respect and that level of optimism, that level of self-empowerment, and that level of, allowing others to express who they are without, going off into some kind of reaction because they said something, that maybe triggered us or something. It's like we need a whole lot more space for people to just be who they are, but also to move through together into a new understanding of why is it we're experiencing these things at this time. Now, we live in a time where the world is so small compared to what it was, say, when you were born in 1941, although in those days the radio and TV were able to show these images from around the world. But we haven't really developed the human capacity to understand all these different cultures and to work with the value systems that they represent. And so part of recovering our humanity is to be able to articulate our commonly shared values as humanity, whether that's the beauty of arts, whether that's the truth, the ability to tell the truth, which is being objective, which is a lot of what we talked about when we talk about the media, or whether it's love and our capacity to have loving relationships and to have a lot more space for each other, compassion for each other, to be right where we're at and not to require people to be different in order to be acceptable. So I really see this moment in time as kind of an era where we're dealing with these burgeoning meta-crises. We've talked about a lot of them, whether it's AI or whether it's, nanotechnology, whether it's the poisoning of the planet and the sixth extinction, other things that we don't, as a humanity, we haven't really sat down together and said, is this biotech something that we really need to develop that can, do we really need to make mosquitoes so that, they can, mosquitoes by biting can vaccinate other things? Is that all necessary? Is it all right? We don't have those conversations. Certainly we don't have them among the citizenry. And it often seems like disembodied minds are making decisions for us that are not in our best interests. And so in dealing with the meta crisis is not just these different things that are happening, but it is our capacity as humans to do this very thing that we're talking about today, recover our humanity, to be able to understand, to be able to shift into a new paradigm of thinking where we can start to address this issue of feeling like we're separate from each other, we're separate from the world, and we're all these little individual fighting, competing bodies, and that mindset hasn't worked. It's not working for us. No. And
it's going directly in the wrong direction. I mean, I think it speaks to a future which is really dystopian, a future none of us really want. So we got to change. We have to go another direction now.
Well, so I'd like to talk a little bit, just kind of as we're winding down the program a bit here, about the rules of civil conversation. And this is there's a graphic that we'll be showing, and this is by a website called the Rules of Civil Conversation.org. And, you and I think, talked ahead of the show, talking about, we're really, in a sense, talking about, in the new commons, a new operating system or a new way of being in community. It's not really that it's new. It's like we've known about these things, but in a kind of a winner-take-all and a meme-oriented, outrage-oriented culture, we have lost touch with some of these things. So I'm just going to read one, and you can read the next, and we can go on. Yeah. The first rule is try to reach a shared understanding rather than win the argument. That's, I think, the approach that we're going to take. So if I don't understand what you're trying to say, rather than, you're wrong, Johanna, I'll say, well, how did you come to that point of view? So if that would be rule number one. If we could start doing that in community, we would really, I think, start to flourish.
And rule number two would be to clarify with others to make sure I genuinely understand their perspective. Now, this is a really important one, because what this really means is that you got to listen. This is really about listening, that you're listening to them, and that you're not just shutting off what you hear because it doesn't agree with what you currently believe. So, and because if you do that, then you begin to understand where it is they're coming from, why they're saying what they're saying. And then maybe there's a chance for you to come to some kind of a, shall we say, agreement? Down the road, maybe agreement. But in the meantime, just listen, just actually understanding them. It's so, so important. So you have to keep asking them to clarify, asking them questions which will allow them to clarify what it is, especially if you don't understand what it is they're talking about. So,
Yeah, and number 3, endeavor to avoid committing logical fallacies in support of my claims. And we'll get into these more in future shows, but logical fallacies would be like, character assassination. If we don't like what they said, I'm not going to argue the point. I'm just going to make sure that I put you down, or straw manning an argument, which is like taking one bit that may or may not be related to the argument, saying, hey, it's all about that. So there's so many different ways that people have biases in their argumentation. And I think part of like moving beyond that into civil conversation is to be able to step back, point them out, notice when we're happening in ourselves, and noticing when they're happening in others. So
yes, okay. So then number 5 is try to be reasonable, rational, and create coherent arguments. Obviously, when you all get excited, we do things that aren't very rational and coherent.
Yeah.
So it's tapping that down so you can...
Exactly, and this is a practice, obviously. Number 6, refrain from personal attack, sarcasm, and mean-spiritedness. I think that kind of stands on its own. Yeah,
okay. Use the principle of charity, see the merits of other points of view. Yes, I think that's understandable, too, unless you want to say something about that.
Well, I mean, just if you say something I disagree with, I'm not going to assume that you're trying to put me down or that you're wrong. Principle of charity is like, let me look for the positive elements. What values are you attempting to express that I'm not understanding well? And then number 8.
And remain genuinely receptive to changing my mind. Yes, this is what we all need to do.
Exactly.
Say, I may not have all the answers. In fact, I usually don't.
Exactly.
Okay. So moving on here.
You were going to talk a little bit about the...
Okay, so just quickly about the fact that this show is not about us. We're very excited about putting it together, but we really want to include other people. So most of the time, when we get the opportunity, we'll have a third person here who we can bounce off of, and that person will have their own perspectives, their own expertise, and should be more exciting than just simply seeing two of us. So,
exactly.
And go ahead.
And maybe eventually even more people than that. I mean, I would love to have forums, and if Fact TV can help us, produce those where we have more people, more points of view, being shared, and have there being more long form conversations where it's not just about, oh, now I'm saying this and I hope you believe me, but it's like, can we actually have a conversation going back and forth and come to a new understanding together? So we're going to have a guest in 2 weeks. We'll be back on the 18th, and we're going to have a guest, Kristen Reynolds, who is an NVC practitioner. NVC is short for nonviolent communication, and it fits perfectly in with the rules of conversation here that we just talked about, because nonviolent communication is very much all about the skill set of hearing what another person has to say. It's that listening that you were talking about, being able to listen, and even if what they're saying is difficult for us to hear, to be able to interpret that from the point of view of, all right, there are needs and values and desires that this person is representing and expressing, even in a difficult statement or share, and then being able to come back to that person with a heartfelt communications, making requests, not demands. So I'm really looking forward to having Kristen on and kind of helping us set more of the stage that we're hoping to explore over the course of time on the show.
And we wanted to say a few words, brief words, because we're running out of our hour here, about Gerhard Betting, our dear friend who has passed just recently at 94 years old. John Michael knew him better than I did. An activist, a person born in the Netherlands, who then spent his teenage years in war-torn Germany, has had a lot of different kinds of experiences, a very, person who motivated, inspired lots of people. At some point, we might have some of the videos he made when we had Cheshire TV. He had his own program. What was that called?
The View from Here.
The View from Here,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
The View from Here, which had a lot of interesting information.
And I think we were both on that show more than once?
Yes, we were both interviewed on that show. Yeah.
Gerhard was born in 1929. He just passed at the age of 94. He spent 5 years under Nazi occupation in the Netherlands. He was a great activist. He started or helped to cater to several different organizations locally, including the Orem Foundation. He was part of the Mennonite Freedom Forum, which is where I met him back in 2003 when we were attempting to stop the rush to war in Iraq. A lot of different groups were out here, and we started producing conferences and other events back then, and he wrote a ton of letters to the editor. He was president of the board for Monadnock Institute that I started back in 2005, and then was on the board of Collaborative Communities Coalition up until the time that he left us. He left the way he wanted to leave, in his own bed, with his family nearby, and his legacy is, he. At 94, he was more active than more people that are, at my age, or younger. He had a very strong sense of moral centeredness around what we should be thinking about and doing, and he spoke out very strongly and was a musician and did a lot of other things in community. He was greatly loved, and we're kind of, we're carrying on his legacy.
We are.
With this show, I think.
Right. He inspired us to all kinds of things, and he leaves a huge hole in his passing, which we have to step into.
Exactly. Exactly. And there'll be a remembrance for him later in the summer, and we'll let people know when that is, because a lot of people watching this show, I think, understand the impact that he had, and we're carrying on his legacy. We're going to continue to do what he felt was important, and he spent a lot of time on health freedom as well, and we know that's a contentious area in these times, but we're not going to shy away from these. But we're also, as we present information to you, we want you to know that our perspective is, don't believe us, go do your own research. We might be provoking you to think in ways that you haven't thought, or bringing new information to you, but we're not saying to you that this is the end, this is the truth, and now you have to believe it. We're saying, let's get engaged with each other in these kind of long-form conversations.
Yep.
So I just want to thank my co-host, Johanna, for agreeing to come on and co-create this space, and thank the producers again, Josh and Garrett, for their work in helping us get set up here today. And we look forward to seeing you on the 18th. And the show will be on YouTube and Facebook and other places. So we'll let you know. And if you have ideas for show, we'll let you know how you can contact us in one of our future shows. So really,
thank you so much.
Right, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Right, take care.